Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Kessling. I'm the Vice Dean of the ICCA. Welcome to our first of our programme of webinars this autumn. And let me introduce you, first of all, to Jane Hutton, who's sitting to my right, who is one of the directors of online learning at the ICCA, and very much in control of the Part 1 course, which you'll hear about in a moment. The other director of online learning is Patrick Ryan, who you can see. Certainly, Patrick on my screen is bottom left, but I know what Zoom's like, and he could be somewhere completely different on yours. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Patrick. And a very warm welcome also to Jody Tobin. Jody, who you can see there. Jody was actually a student with us until relatively recently, and now we're in the fortunate position of actually being able to employ Jody in various capacities, not least helping us go through the course and improve those parts that need improving, but also as a senior director of the School Exclusion Project, which is something that the ICCA has recently taken over with barristers from 11 KBW and Matrix Chambers, which we're really excited about because that's going to really help our students not just get advocacy experience, practical advocacy experience, but really enhance their prospects of pupillage. Today, we want to take you through really what the ICCA Bar Course is all about. I say ICCA, I also say ICCA. You'll say, I'm sure, both of those things. It's because Inns of Court College of Advocacy does not trip off the tongue particularly easily. So ICCA, ICCA, whatever you want to call it, it's absolutely fine. Most people call it the ICCA Bar Course. Just to put this in context, of course, the way that legal education or training for the bar works, there's essentially three stages that you have to go through. There's the academic stage of training, which is where many of you will be now, which is at university, either doing a law degree or a non-law degree. If you do a non-law degree, you will then have to do essentially a course like the Graduate Diploma in Law, which is a law conversion course, which teaches you those fundamental legal concepts you need to know before you start your bar training. When you start your bar training, you move into what's called the vocational stage of training, and that is your bar course. There are 10 providers of bar training. The ICCA is just one of those. We do our course in an unusual, if not in a unique way, which we'll explain to you in a moment. It's a two-part course which combines or starts off with civil and criminal litigation. And then you do your Bar Standards Board BSB exams, centrally set exams as they're known. When you've passed those, you then come and join us in the Inns of Court, where we train you in the exciting concepts of advocacy, submissions advocacy, cross-examination, examination in chief, opinion writing, drafting, all of those things. But Jane's going to tell you all about that in a moment. And once you've completed your bar course, you can then be called to the bar. And I think, Jody, in fact, you're being called to the bar very shortly. Is that right? When is that?
Yes, I am. In 2 weeks.
2 weeks,
scary.
absolutely. So that allows you to be called to the bar. You have to do something called qualifying sessions with your inn of choice, which are effectively additional educational evenings or afternoons, sometimes weekends if you want to do it like that, in advocacy, professional ethics and the like. And then you have to pass what's called a fit and proper person test, checks you haven't got criminal convictions and the like. And then you get called to the bar. And you can also start your pupillage. And your pupillage will normally be 12 months. And then, if you're fortunate, you'll be taken on by your chambers or your work-based training provider, such as Government Legal Department or the CPS, and you start your career as a barrister. So that essentially is how it works. So what I want to do right now is pass over to Patrick, who's going to explain to you. Oh, sorry, you're doing part one. Sorry, I got that the wrong way around. I thought Patrick was doing part one and Jane was doing part two. I apologise. Jane's doing part one. So I'm going to pass over to Jane now to explain how part one really works.
Right, thanks, Chris. Before we start, do you want everybody to save all of their questions till the end, or are you happy to take them in chunks as we go through?
That's a good point. Yeah, if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A. That's rather than the chat function, the Q&A. And what we will do is we will look at those and we'll answer those at convenient moments as we move through.
Brilliant. Okay, hello everybody. So as Chris has already explained ably, the course that we provide at ICCA is divided into two completely separate chunks. And the first part 1, will lead you towards the knowledge subjects, so criminal litigation and civil litigation, and part 2 covers all the practical skills plus ethics. So part 1 is delivered entirely online. And by that, I don't mean that you come along to online sessions like you had to do during COVID, for example. What it is an online resource which is entirely flexible, which you can access whenever you like, 24/7, and you can work through the materials at your own pace in your own time. It's totally flexible, and you can either choose to take it over a recommended pathway. So by that, we give you the opportunity to start the course in either September or January. And if you follow the recommended pathway, you will be able to complete both assessments at the first opportunity for the next sitting of those assessments, which is provided by the Bar Standards Board. So if you start in September, your first opportunity to take the assessments is in December. And if you start in January, your first opportunity to take the assessments is April. So that gives you roughly 12 to 14 weeks to complete the online elements of the course. And it's totally doable, but it does require the equivalent of treating the course as though it is a full-time course of education. If you want to work alongside, the beauty of the programme is that you can do that. It's entirely flexible. However, it will probably take you longer before you are ready and able to take those assessments. But that's absolutely fine. Lots of our students do it that way, and they take a little bit longer to get there, and that works really well for them. Now, in terms of online learning, you might think this all sounds a bit dry. It's all online. There are no lessons. It's all me. But what we've done is we've tried to make the course as engaging as possible. And the key that Patrick and I had in mind the entire time we were designing the architecture of the course was to keep everything interactive. So you're not just going to be consuming a lot of material on the screen. You will be getting involved. So there are lots of different quizzes. There are lots of different, more interesting, slightly more sophisticated activities. And also there is a lot of film content, because one of the difficulties, of course, of online learning is trying to put those abstract principles into a practical context. And so we tried to solve that. Jody will tell you how successful we were. We tried to solve that by designing overarching case studies that go all the way through the part 1 course, both in civil and crime. So you dip in and out of those case studies. Some of our students have described them as legal dramas, which we will take, but basically they're case studies that are designed to cover the knowledge points that you need, the litigation points that you need during the course. And at various times, you will see actual films of those cases being enacted in real life. So you will have conferences that you can watch, which explain difficult legal concepts, or you will be able to see courtroom scenes of various different stages of the pre-trial, the trial, and the post-trial process, which then allows you to put all of your learning into that practical context, which is what really helps you when it comes to the final assessments. The other thing that is really key to being successful in the BSB assessments is your ability to practice the exam style questions. And our bar course gives you, I think, the biggest resource of practice questions, because as you go through the course, at the end of each of the 9 units, there is a miniature assessment which is designed to replicate the style of assessment that you get in that final Bar Standards Board exam. Also, every 3 units, there is a slightly bigger test which encompasses all the topics you've covered within the last 3 units. And then at the very end of the course, of course, we give you the official BSB mock, but we've also designed an entire new ICCA mock assessment as well. So by the end of the course, you've had the opportunity to do the equivalent of 4 complete mock examinations worth of questions. So you're fully conversant with the type of question, the best way to approach answering those questions. And also you will have covered a lot of the points that it's possible to test when it comes to that final assessment. As well as all of the course content, we do try and create a bit of a community for you. So there are lots of forums where you can talk to each other, and most importantly, you can get academic support. So we don't cut you completely adrift. We don't say, here's the course, off you go, we'll see you at the exam date. You will be able to interact with the academic staff, and you will be able to ask and have answered detailed questions about the syllabus content. We also provide pastoral support. That's mainly done via Zoom. We can speak to you if you have any issues at all. We can point you in the direction of helpful resources if you need them. And we definitely give you the same opportunities for career support and also for extracurricular activities that you have when you also get onto part 2 of the course. But I won't go into a lot of detail on that, Chris, because I think you probably want to talk about things like that a bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I think that's a quick trot through part 1. I don't want to give you too much more detail than that, but of course that may have already provoked some questions. So do you think now would be a good time to see if we've got any of those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I can see that there's 2 there. The first question we've got, is it possible to do the assessments for part 1 in a longer span? For example, enrolling in September, but taking the assessment in April?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of our students do that. Some students come with the plan of wanting to get through it in the 3 months and take the assessments at the first opportunity, and they change their minds when they're faced with the reality of the course and they decide they want to do other things alongside it. But lots of our students actually come along with the plan already to take the assessments either in a staggered way, where they take 1 assessment in December, 1 in April, or where they have a much longer pathway planned, particularly those people who have work responsibilities or caring responsibilities, those kind of things.
Okay, the next question we have is advice from Victoria, advice for international students on applying. Would it be possible to obtain a student visa for the course? The way that our course works is that, as Jane was explaining, part 1 you can do from any location in your own time. So for that reason, there are no timetabled classes. You don't come to us to do that particular course. You can do it over that short pathway, that guided pathway. You can do it longer in a more flexible way if you wish. So for that reason, whilst you're a student at the ICCA, you don't need to be in the country as such. The only time you need to be in the country is for the part 2 part of the course. And because that's under 6 months, it means that there's a certain type of student of visa you need to get. Now you can go onto our website, onto the FAQs, and you can see some visa advice there. And I'm not going to go into it now, principally because I might get it wrong because it's not my area of expertise. But what I can tell you is that the ICCA are not a visa sponsoring organisation, unlike some other bar course providers. So for that reason, the type of visa requirements for this course would be different to those you would require for other longer full-time courses. So please look at our FAQs and indeed, excuse me, get in touch with us if there are any further queries you have in relation to that. Another question for you, I see. Are there any in-person opportunities on part 1? Well, the reality is that part 1 is designed to be a remote course. So in fact, in terms of opportunities, yes, we have links with Advocate, previously the Bar Pro Bono unit. You can join the School Exclusion Project. And for that reason, if you were close enough to London to do that, because we appreciate a number of our part 1 students won't be in the country, or they may be in very different parts of the country to London. But if you're close enough, then indeed you could take part in the School Exclusion Project. but certainly you could do that on part 2 anyway, but you could do it on part 1. So there's multiple opportunities for you on part 1. It's just really depends geographically on where you are.
Great. And Eric has got a question. So Eric's in Malaysia and he's asking if the BSB assessments are in person or if you can do them online. Sadly, a couple of years ago, the BSB removed the online opportunity for the centralised assessments for the bar course. So the decree has come from above that you are no longer able to do those exams online. So all of our assessments are in person. However, having said that, if you are an international student, you can complete those assessments in a local test centre in your country. You don't have to fly across to the UK to do those.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Joe. Before Patrick, is there anything you'd like to add to what Jane has said? Since Patrick is one of the architects of the part 1 course alongside Jane, I don't want him to have a go at me after this webinar to say that I didn't invite him to say anything. So Patrick, would you like to say anything?
Chris, I've learned over the years that that if we wind Jane up and let her go, there's nothing more for me to add afterwards.
Yeah.
Would you like me to talk about part 2?
Before you do, there's one thing I'd like to ask both of you. I know you probably don't want to blow your own trumpets on this, but I want to ask you about the success rates on the part 1 course. Patrick. Chris is rather embarrassingly referring to the to what the Bar Standards Board have said about the ICCA course. So let's use their words rather than my words of Jane's words. They publish a report at the end of each cycle of assessments about the performance of that particular cohort, and the last report said this: the ICCA has the highest average passing rate across both litigation subjects and all sittings to date. That's going back to December 2020. The ICCA, the BSB Continue, is thus far some way ahead of the other AATO centres, those are the other bar course providers, in terms of cohort performance. Our average passing rate hovers around 90% for these exams. So if you want to translate that, students on the ICCA Bar Course have a 9 out of 10 chance of passing their BSB exams each time they sit them. And that puts us very pleasingly quite a long way ahead of most of the other bar providers based on the data produced by the BSB. So I think although I think it's probably right to say the first time that the students all sat the exams, Jane and I had quite a nervous Christmas waiting for the results to be published. But I think as of October 2024, I think we're happy to say, Chris, the model works. Yeah, not only that, but I remember this because I remember Patrick dancing around the room. But in fact, 100% of our students at that first sitting passed the course. So it's quite extraordinary. So as Patrick says, and it's worth making the point. These aren't our statistics; they're the independent Bar Standards Board statistics, and it demonstrates that the work that all of us, but particularly Jane and Patrick and the online learning team, have put into the course is very much designed to engage with you in a way that actually really makes you remember what's going on and allows you to pass these exams in a really extraordinary way. So yeah,
I think we should probably issue a note of caution as well at this point, which is that whilst our success rates are brilliant and we're very happy with them, you still need to be the right kind of student, the kind of student who is okay with being totally responsible for your learning for that period of time, because it is down to you. We give you all the tools, but you will need to engage and to commit and really be able to work independently for a fairly lengthy period of time in order to succeed. So it's not for everybody, we accept that, but if you are that kind of person, then absolutely the model works.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And in fact, if you decide to make an application, there is a question that specifically asks you to address that, whether the way that the course is structured is for you as an individual. So we do take that really seriously. We take the view that there is no one-size-fits-all bar course in reality. And we recommend to everyone that they look at all the alternatives, go onto other providers' websites, have a look at what they offer, ask them questions just in the way that you're asking us questions. And that is the best approach I think that really anyone can take. Okay, so Patrick, over to you, please. Part 2. So you've finished part 1, you've completed your Bar Standards Board centrally set assessments in civil litigation and criminal litigation. It's delightful now that they're out of the way, not least on most traditional bar courses. Those are the last exams you take. On our course, they're really the first exams you take, and then you move on and join us in the inns for part 2. Patrick, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Just to follow up on that point that Chris was making, one of the unique things about the model at the ICCA is not only do you not start part 2 until you finish part 1, but we won't take any money off you for part 2 until you've successfully completed part 1. So what we tried to do in designing the course in that way was to de-risk it as far as possible. So if you get into part 1 and decide it's not for you, or you get a better offer. So Jane and I had an email from a student 2 weeks ago who said, I've just been given a training contract. I'm going to leave part 1. I'm going to go into the LP, do the SQE, and I'm going to go and be a solicitor. Great. That was what she wanted to do. So there can be reasons why people leave part 1 that aren't to do with their success or failure on the course. You are already financially on the hook for part 1 until you start part 2. So once you finish part 1, you get to move on to what I think probably Jody will tell me if I'm right or wrong, but the majority of our students consider to be the exciting part of the course, which is the skills teaching on part 2. And that is a short, full-time course. And can I, because Barnaby Pinfield, the bar course leader, isn't here with us today, can I underline something he would want me to underline to all of you? We do mean full-time when it comes to part 2. Part 1 is specifically designed to allow you to study at your own rate and take the exams when you want to. But when you commit to part 2, you are committing to a 17 or 19-week in-person full-time course. And that we don't just mean full-time in terms of the classes that you attend, but also the prep you have to do as well. So please bear that in mind. When we say full-time on part 2, we do mean full-time. But what will you be doing in those 17 or 19 weeks? Well, you'll be doing the skill subjects largely, advocacy, both narrative advocacy, making submissions before a judge, and witness handling, trial advocacy, as we might otherwise call it. You'll be learning about conference, how to give advice to a client in a conference face-to-face. Legal research and opinion writing, so honing your legal research skills and then advising clients in writing, and then finally drafting, the kind of technical side of legal writing, how to draft statements of case and witness statements and other formal court documents that you'll need to know how to do when you get out into pupillage and practice. You'll also study professional ethics on part 2. That is, unlike the other modules that I've just described, that's an online module, which very much follows the pattern of what you've learned in terms of online learning on part 1. So those skill subjects coupled with professional ethics are what await you on part 2. You'll have the ability on part 2 to really focus on those skill subjects, having got, as Chris said a moment ago, those difficult litigation exams out the way. A small plea from the tutors, please don't forget everything you learnt on part 1 in part 2. You will need some of the rules of evidence and some of the litigation rules to be able to navigate the skills, but you won't at least be faced with having to learn it all and revise it and be assessed on it at the same time as you're trying to focus your attention on honing those skills that you're beginning to learn. So that's great. You will be taught in small classes, but by and large. Advocacy tends to be 1 tutor to 4 students. Conference tends to be 1 tutor to 6. Legal writing, both in opinion writing and drafting, is 1 to 12. But the focus is on small groups, and particularly small groups when it comes to the advocacy tuition, which is one of the things we pride ourselves on at the ICCA. As I said, attendance is for 17 or 19 weeks. That's slightly confusing, but don't be confused. There are 2 cycles for part 2, which Chris will talk about in more detail later. Because of where things like Christmas falls, one of them slightly longer in terms of the number of weeks. But it's roughly a 4-month window in which you'll do your part 2 course. We are at the ICCA dedicated to ensuring the highest educational standards. you will be taught by experienced tutors, people who have been to court and done the things you are doing. Either very recently, we have a stable of visiting lecturers who are still in practice, or by those who are very, very experienced at tuition and teaching those skills. But all of us have been in practice at some point in our careers. For me, it's getting a little bit far away now, but for the tutors on part 2, some of the people that we recruited very recently came directly out of practice to come and teach on our course. So you're getting really up to the minute information from the tutors on that course. We teach you all aspects of advocacy to do in terms of courtroom advocacy. In crime, you'll do everything from a bail app to how to prepare to an appeal for the Court of Appeal, and you'll do trial advocacy in the middle, obviously. In civil, we have a real emphasis on the realities of civil advocacy. So some civil courses in advocacy, I've taught these in the past, can feel a little bit like a mooting course. In other words, you do the kind of advocacy you might expect to do in a university or a postgraduate mooting competition. We focus on what it's actually like to go and do civil advocacy day to day in the county courts, in busy lists, and try and give you an insight into that, as well as, of course, as the witness handling and the trial advocacy that is all important, and which, not to beat about the bush, is the most fun part of what we do. I think witness handling is generally the most fun thing that you do in an advocacy classroom when you're with us. As I said, the course is taught within the precincts of the Inns of Court. You'll either be on a cycle that is attending classes in Middle and Inner Temple or at Gray's Inn and Lincoln's Inn, just depending on which cycle in the year that you choose. But you have access to all of the Inn's libraries as well. So you are able to study in your individual Inn's library as a quiet place for doing study and prep and research. But you can also, I'm right in saying, Chris, aren't I, use any of the other Inn's libraries as well? ICCA students have access to all 4 Inn's libraries.
Part 2 students can use any library. Part 1 students, just the library of their chosen Inn.
Thank you. And it's also right to say that the Inn's librarians themselves are an integral part of the teaching that goes on at the ICCA. They come, all 4 of those Inn's librarians come at the beginning of each cycle to talk about how to use the libraries themselves, how to hone your legal research skills, and you have access to the benefit of their wisdom and their experience for really, really good legal research skills development. We try to concentrate on the vital practitioner skills we think you will need when you get into pupillage and into practice. So our goal is to feed back to you on your early performances in a way that is going to improve your performance and make it more likely you will succeed at the next stage of your careers, which for many of you, as Chris said, will be pupillage or some other form of work-based learning. That feedback can feel quite challenging when you first arrive. It's a different way of learning. It's very different to part 1, which is purely online. It will be quite different to what most of you will have experienced at university. We try to drive you to be the best advocate that you can be, and that involves you having to be reflective and having to engage with the tutors in relation to the feedback they're giving to you. But our experience now over 4, nearly 5 years is that is absolutely the best way for you to firstly pass the bar course, and secondly to set you up for the kind of pupillages that you will be hoping to obtain, or may already have obtained in some cases in the early parts of your careers. We have strong links to the profession. You'll be introduced to a range of people at all levels of the profession. They'll come and do workshops, they'll give guest lectures, there'll be symposiums. You'll be introduced to people from the specialist bar associations. If you are somebody who definitely wants, from the very get-go that you want to be involved in employment law, there will be people from the Employment Law Bar Association that we can introduce you to, and that you can forge those links if that's what you've already decided you want to, where you want to go. We also have talks from experts in other fields, neuroscience, statistics, forensic psychology and psychopathy, so that you can also see how other professionals engage with the bar itself and where there are crossovers between the work you do as a barrister and where the work other professionals do, which comes into contact with either the criminal or the civil justice system. We have a dedicated career service that is accessible to you both on part 1 and on part 2. We have an amazing resource, which Chris won't tell you about because he wrote most of it and he's too modest. but an amazing resource on the VLE for gathering information that you might need when you're applying for pupillage or for other positions. But we also offer you the support of the Career Service for things like mock interviews, for CV prep and workshops, so that you can really hone those pupillage applications and hone your interview technique before you get into the room with the chambers that choose to interview you. I think I've said everything, Chris, that I need to say about part 2 at this point in time. I know that some questions are coming in. It's now a good time.
I was just going to say that there's some really good questions that have come in, and I wondered, Jody, whether I could call on you, because I know that for all of you watching this webinar, in many ways, it's one thing hearing from us, but hearing from the authentic voice, which is Jody, who's actually done the course as a student, might actually be really helpful to you. So the first question is this, Jody. How many hours of classes per week are there on average in part 2?
Per week. So the classes per se are, I would say you probably have 2 or 3 of those classes a week where you're actually in class. But the preparation you need for it, so you're normally there between a Monday and a Thursday, say. But there is a lot of work. So, for example, you have to prepare a week in advance for, say, for example, a witness handling exercise or a submission. You have to go away and do the legal research for an opinion writing class. So, although you're in class for a consolidated period, a lot of people will then go to the library after class. So you do find yourselves at the inn longer. So you get the most benefit out of being there and speaking to your cohort as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. The next question is this. Is it possible to undertake part 2 in person while residing in another city in the UK? For example, travelling from Leeds to London for classes each day. This comes from an anonymous attendee, but I've got to say you're very brave, whoever you are, travelling from Leeds every single day. What do you think, Jody? Is that possible?
So some students that I was on the cohort with did travel. I would say, and obviously I did a hybrid version where I stayed up in London during the week, but I went home on the weekends, because obviously sometimes cost is a factor. But I will say that the travel on top of the work does put an added load on. Obviously trying to get back and forth to London is not always easy traffic wise or train wise. So I found that the best way is to stay there in London to get the most out of it, mainly because you're not jutting off to a train station to go 4 hours home, for example, up to Yorkshire. But you could work on the train. So it depends on you as a person and what works for you, and what commitments you have outside. Obviously, if you have a family, you're not necessarily going to displace yourself to London for 4 months. So it's manageable. But you just have to factor in that you will be traveling a great deal of time and having to study at the same time.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
I
Just to
I was going to say, I think one thing as well to mention, because I think this crops up a bit, Jody, is that your timetable varies from week to week. So it's not the case that you can always say, I have my classes on a Monday and a Tuesday, so I'll just come down for Monday and Tuesday, and then I'll go home for Wednesday and Thursday. The timetable varies depending upon what stage of the course you're at. So you could have lessons any day between Monday and Thursday. Jody's nodding, so I think that's right.
Yeah, sometimes it's on a Friday as well if there's something particularly special going on, or there's a dean's lecture, which are really helpful to go to, and anything like that.
So I hope that also partly answers the next question, which is this: even though part 2 is full-time in terms of workload, is it full-time in person as well, i.e. full-time Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 for 17, 19 weeks at the inns? So essentially, the normal week would be that classes would be timetabled between Monday and Thursday. Classes would start at 9, and the last class would finish at 4. But you wouldn't actually, as Jody has explained, be in class for all of that time. In fact, the majority of the time you would actually be preparing for classes, because for a cross-examination class, if it's a relatively complex one, that may well take you a day to prep. And other times, other things will take you less. And as Jody said, you might be doing legal research for an opinion writing exercise. Excuse me. So there's a lot of things going on. It may well be that you've involved yourself also in the school exclusion project or the advocacy committee, and you've got a MOOC coming up or a school exclusion project case coming up. So again, you have to think about how you're going to manage your time, and taking into account what Jane's just added, which is every week can look somewhat different. So how a Monday looked in week 3 may look very different to how a Monday looks in week 7. So bear that in mind. It means it's very difficult. You know that generally you've got Friday away from the ICCA, but other days it's very difficult to say, I'm certainly going to be free at this particular time. So I hope that explains that reasonably well for you. One final question. Can you please elaborate further on, upon completion of ICCA, students will be awarded a PG DIP by King's College London, the ICCA's validating academic partner? Yes, of course, I'm very happy to do that. I was going to get to that, but I'll deal with it now. The Inns of Court College of Advocacy is the essentially the training division of an organisation called the Council of the Inns of Court. And we were set up, this is our genesis, to train practicing barristers. And we moved on to training pupils as well. And then we thought we do all of these things for the practicing bar. We're actually ideally placed to actually run a bar course for people who want to become barristers. So that's how we got to where we are. However, we are not a university in our own right. So in order to give an academic award, a postgraduate diploma, we essentially have buddied up. That's the technical term, of course. We have come together with King's College London, who are, to use the proper term, validating academic partner. And essentially, therefore, we work together, and the award you get is an award from the ICCA, and the academic part of that is from King's College London. So your PG DIP comes from King's College London, who work in partnership essentially with the ICCA. So I hope that explains that. Okay, so I'm going to move on at this stage because I want to explain a few other practical concepts. And the first one I want to get to is course cycles. Because they can cause some confusion. So we've got a 2-part course. Part 1, BSB exams. Part 2, the in-person training at the inns. But just to add a layer of complexity, because that's what lawyers like to do, it's like the exception to the rule, all of that stuff, we actually run our course throughout the whole year. And we run it in 2 cycles. So you could start your part 1 course, your BSB exam part of the course. You could start that in September, that's cycle 1, or alternatively, you could choose to start it in January, that's cycle 2. Then what happens is then you move on to part 2 at the next time that part 2 is running, after you've completed part 1. So we also run part 2 in 2 cycles. So we have so our second cycle, we have a part 2 that either starts in September, or we also have a part 2 that starts in March. Let me try and make a little bit of sense of that for you. So imagine you come along and you start your part 1 course in September. You do your BSB exams at the first available sitting, which would be December, because those BSB exams, you can sit them either in December, April, August. So essentially 3 times a year. So you decide to take all of your BSB exams in December. You pass them, fantastic. You are then free, which is quite useful because you can make all your pupillage applications until March, and you'll start your part 2 course in March, and then you'll finish that course in July. Let me just give you another twist on that. Let's say that you start your part 1 course in September, and you decide just to do your criminal exam in December. You pass that, thanks very much, and then you decide to do your civil exams in April. That's great. Then at that stage, you would, if you pass, you could start your part 2 course in the September, and you would complete that in January. So that's the way that would work. Alternatively, what you may choose to do is say, do you know what? I want to do this in a slightly different way. And that's great, because that's what the ICCA does. They are flexible, and that's really the whole approach here. I'm going to start my part 1 course in January. I can then take my exams at the first available opportunity in April, the BSB exams. I pass those, fantastic. I can then start part 2 in September. But let me take a twist on that. Let's say you decide to take a more flexible approach than that. You decide to start your part 1 course in January. You then take 1 exam, for example, in April, your criminal exam. Then let's say you decide to do your civil exams in August. And you pass all of those, then the first opportunity you would have to start your part 2 course would be in March the following year, by which stage, and you would finish that course in July. So that works out quite well. Let me just a word of caution to all of you, because a lot of people think, oh, if I apply for pupillage during the course, and pupillage applications are made from early January to early February, and you find out whether you've got pupillage in May, beginning of May. The reality is the overwhelming majority of pupillages, once you find out in May, won't be for September, October that year. They'll be for September, October the following year. So you actually have a long period of time after that. The majority of people who will be starting pupillage the same year that they conclude the course will be those people that came to the course with pupillage because they applied for pupillage before they started the ICCA Bar course. So if all of that sounds like some crazy form of science, like a card game, often you need to play it to understand it. It's all very well someone explaining it to you. What I've tried to do is put together a page on our website that makes sense of this for you. And it's called ICCA Bar Course Timeline and Applying for Pupillage. And it sets out how all these timelines work and actually how the pupillage application process works within it. So go onto our website. You'll see ICCA Bar Course at the top. There's a drop-down menu. You'll see the ICCA Bar Course timeline page. Click on that, and that will explain all you need to know. Similarly, on the About the ICCA Bar Course page, there's a lot of information to help you about various routes through the multiple cycles you can take. In essence, we want to make your life as easy as we possibly can. And the way we try and do that is to be as flexible as possible. So it's very, very different, this course. I'm going to answer this question since it's just brought up. If you start the course in September and decide to only take the BSB exams in April, are you able to start part 2 in March before having completed the exams? Or would you have to wait until September? That's a really good question. The answer is you must successfully pass all the BSB centrally set exams before you start part 2. And there's a really good reason for that, is because part 2 is intensive. It is a volume heavy course, and you need to really manage your time effectively. And we know that on a truncated course, on a course that only lasts for 17 weeks, if you were also doing your part 1 exams, essentially it would be too much. It would be too much for anyone to take. If you think about it, most courses would last a whole academic year doing that. Part 2 is a shorter course, so we think it would be very unfair. There have been exceptions to that during COVID, for example. Some people couldn't take their part 1 exams for various reasons, but the reasons would have to be wholly exceptional. So generally, no. And someone said, and Robin said, just to double check my understanding, are you saying that after passing the BSB assessments, you don't have to start part 2 at the next available start date, but could instead delay while you move your family to London? That's a great question, Robin. Yes, absolutely. You could delay it. So we will work with you. And let's say you're ready to start in March, but you say, actually, I prefer to start my part 2 course in September. That's no problem at all with us. We'd happily work with you on that. And as Patrick says, we do not charge you for part 2 unless you start part 2. That's the way we work. You don't sign on the dotted line here and we say we're going to take all your money. The reality is you start part 1, you pay for part 1, and then you pay for part 2, which leads me perfectly onto the concept of fees, because the fee for part 1 is £4,020 and the fee for part 2 is £12,061. So when you start the course, all we'll be asking you for is £4,020. Then when you decide to start part 2, we'll then invoice you for £12,061. And there's various flexible payment arrangements we can follow, i.e. monthly payments, payment in 2 instalments, that sort of thing. So I hope that helps a little bit. Let me also say this, that those fees, so the total fee, therefore, is £16,081. Those fees include what's known as the Bar Standards Board levy, which is an additional cost. So we put that within the fees. You're not asked for anything else. And it includes all the books and resources you require to take the exams. You also get Westlaw, you get LexisNexis, you get legal research resources you require. And of course, we know, as you've heard, that most of our students, as Jody has mentioned, will go along to the library, where, of course, all of the inns have vast libraries. And for all of you who haven't been to the inns, they really are oases in the centre of London. They're all beautiful. I can't tell you which one to join because it's a personal choice. It may be simply based on the architecture. They're all absolutely stunning. You might like Fountain Court in Middle Temple more than you like South Square up at Gray's Inn. But who knows? You may think one hall is nicer than another. The reality is they're all beautiful. You'll be spoilt for choice. My recommendation to you, however, is get to join an inn as early as possible, not least because the inns give over £5 million a year in scholarships. They do that irrespective of where you do your bar training. A word of caution, I'm flagging this up now. If you're starting bar training next year, you need to get your application for a scholarship in by the 1st of November this year. So go onto the inn's individual websites and look up their scholarships pages and get your applications in. It's so worthwhile. We also have a bursary scheme. We've got 2 actually. Well, there's the same scheme, but they're sponsored by 2 specialist bar associations, SBAs as they're known. One is the Commercial Bar Association and the other one is the Chancery Bar Association. We're hoping to get more of those. But if you're successful in that application, you could get up to £10,000 off your fees, which is very helpful. I should say some people do a course with an LLM add-on element. We don't do an LLM add-on course at the ICCA for multiple reasons. It's very helpful, I know, to some students because it allows you to get a government loan. It's worthwhile bearing in mind that's a loan, is not a grant, and the current government loan is £12,471 for an LLM. We do not do that. One of the reasons is that actually we take the view that for students' prospects in terms of the bar, independent, standalone masters courses are far superior to add-ons to bar courses. And also because we've looked at the concept with King's College London, but actually realised that the expense of it to do a course that would be worthwhile would actually be outside that of many students. We do have a number of students who choose to do master's degrees. They do them before they join us, or they do them after they join us. But certain depends on the chambers and the sort of work you want to go to do. When you look at a chamber's website, you'll see, if you'll look at profiles of new tenants, and you'll see that a lot of them may have master's degrees, particularly in sort of commercial sets and that sort of thing. If you see that, you may well think that that's the sort of thing you want to do. For example, in other sets, for example, family or criminal sets, they may be far more interested in your advocacy skills and less interested in whether you've got a master's degree. So it very much depends on the sort of area of work you want to go into. Someone said, I thought the IN scholarship was only for part 2 of the ICCA, so you could wait until next year to apply. Is this true? Yeah, we do have people that wait. But in fact, it's worthwhile speaking with your IN, because if you got a residential scholarship also, you'd want to align that with when you're doing the part 2 course. But it's right that there have been people who then reapply simply for the part 2. If you get it for part 1 as well, all the better.
Yeah, it's not limited to part 2.
Yeah.
So that's not correct.
Okay. That's what I'm going to say about funding for the moment, but please get your application in for an IN scholarship. Just a few more questions. As far as I understand it, there's a 5-year limit to secure pupillage or to be qualified after the bar course. Does this mean I have to get pupillage within 5 years after part 1, or both part 1 and 2? Can I do part 1, leave and take another job for a year, for example, and then return to do part 2? Excellent question. You have got 5 years to complete bar training. The ICCA, in fact, requires you from starting part 1 to completing part 2 a maximum of 3 years, absent exceptional circumstances. So you would have 3 years with us to do it. It's only after completing your bar training that time starts to run. So no, it doesn't run from part 1. I hope that answers that question.
Can I just quickly
Please do.
hop in with an additional point, though? We wouldn't recommend that you take a year between parts 1 and part 2, because although those exams have been successfully passed, a lot of the knowledge that you learn on part 1 is crucial to actually being able to do part 2 successfully. So the longer you leave that gap, the more revision you're going to have to do of your part 1 knowledge in order to successfully complete part 2. So we'd say, you know, absolutely you can have a bit of a gap, but I wouldn't plan in a massive gap deliberately.
Eric asked a good question. For enrolment for international students, are international students required to pass the IELTS exam for all components, i.e. hearing, reading, writing and speaking? If you look on our website, on the entry requirements page, Eric, you'll see a full explanation of the English language requirements. The reality is we don't ask you to show us an IELTS or other certificate to prove your English language ability, because we test your English language ability during our applications process. Okay, but please have a look at the entry requirements page on the website. It sets all of that out in real detail. And finally, Victoria asked, what is a residential scholarship? A residential scholarship is a fantastic thing, because it means, let's say you've got a residential scholarship from Gray's Inn, you'd be living within Gray's Inn for a set period of time to allow you to do your bar course from the centre of London. And all of the inns, Middle Temple, Inner Temple, Gray's and Lincoln's Inn, they all do residential scholarships. So they'll do multiple different scholarships. I got a scholarship, for example, from Middle Temple back in the day. I won't tell you how long ago, of course, because I don't want to feel that old, but that paid for my wig and gown. That's what my scholarship paid for. You may think that that a scholarship that actually allowed you to live in the Middle Temple was worth a little bit more than that. Yeah. So the reality, there's different sorts of scholarships. And you'll see all of those on the IN's websites, and they are so useful. A number of our students have those residential scholarships, and they're absolutely fantastic. Okay, again, if you look at the fees and funding page on our website, you'll see some really helpful links about funding, including a really good funding guide from the Bar Council. Have a look at that. Let me talk in the last 6 minutes about a few more bits and pieces to help you. Our applications, the way that applications to the ICCA Bar course work is by an online application. And if you are shortlisted, you're then invited to a selection appointment where we have a short advocacy, there's a short advocacy exercise and also a short interview, 10 minutes each. So I always say this to people. Most of our students really enjoy this and everyone goes, yeah, right. But actually, it's true. It works really well. And next Monday, Jody and I are going to be doing a webinar specifically on the applications process. And the reason it's not just me telling you how much fun it is and it's wonderful. The reason Jody's there is because you can ask Jody any questions you have about it and what it actually feels like to go through. But genuinely, please believe me, we try and be really welcoming to you. It allows you to get a little to know, find out a little bit more about us, and us, of course, to find out a little bit more about you. And let me make it absolutely clear at the outset, you know, we are not looking for the finished article. If we were looking for the finished article, it would mean there would be no purpose in us as an educational organisation. We want to take people who've got that raw talent, who've got the enthusiasm and motivation to become barristers, and we want to help you on that journey. We want to help you to get through the course as successfully as you can. And of course, we want to get you to pupillage because we recognise that is what matters. So that is what matters to us. We know it's what matters to you, and we want to work with you as well as we can to get that to happen. It's why not only are our academic results extraordinarily good, but also so are our pupillage rates, because we're very much joined up. We are not an organisation that trains solicitors. We're not an organisation that trains other professionals. We are an organisation that trains barristers and future barristers. That is it. That is our focus. And advocacy is in our name, and that's primarily what we're focused on, in turning you into good barristers and into excellent advocates. So that's really our raison d'etre, if you like. There's a really good question here. Are the applications considered on a rolling basis? No, they're not. So the application portal opens on the 14th of October, Monday, and it closes on Monday, the 13th of January. And we don't look at any of those applications until after that closing date. So as far as we're concerned, it doesn't matter if you apply on Monday, the 14th of October or the 13th of January. The only reason it might matter if you apply on the 13th of January, Jane's a great one for applying on last days of... The only problem with the 13th of January is that it closes at midday, the application portal. So if you're going to leave it late, just leave it to the 12th rather than the 13th. But it doesn't matter to us because it's only after that we look at them. We do not give these what are known as exploding offers. We give everyone an offer at the same time, and we give you a month to decide if you want to come to us. So as I say, we've got that applications webinar coming up. We have multiple other events. I've mentioned a week today that Jody and I are going to be talking about the application process. We've also later on in not so long, we've got a webinar with two of our tutors, head of crime and head of civil, talking about advocacy and preparing advocacy for the bar course. And I also want to give can I say this, a great shout out to Jody, because on Thursday at 12:30 this week, Jody is doing a webinar which is focused on doing the ICCA Bar course, or actually doing bar training from the perspective of a neurodiverse student. So that is going to be a really exciting thing, and you'll be pleased to hear that I'm going to be doing very little talking in that, and Jody is going to be doing a lot of talking in that. So that's what that is all about. You can also come and see us at multiple events, not least the Legal Cheek Virtual Pupillage Fair, which is taking place this Thursday. And I would also recommend to all of you the Bar Council Pupillage Fair on Saturday, the 19th of October. We're at that. That's the London-based event. I know that the Bar Council now do a Northern event as well. We're not at that, principally because I didn't know about it until a few days ago. Next year, I suspect that'll be different. So Patrick's laughing because he's thinking I'm too southeast. You know, I apologise for that. You know, we do try and get around. Also, let me say to anyone, if you want an outreach visit, I visit a lot of universities in October and November. I'd be delighted to come and see you. Please get in touch with us at admissions.
Open day.
Oh yeah, James just reminded me. The biggest event of all, the open day. We've got an open day on the Saturday the 9th of November. It's half a day. It's 10 till 1, and this year it's in Middle Temple Hall. We would be delighted to visit you there. Look at our events page on our website and come and see us, and you can ask us any questions. Jody will be there, Jane and Patrick will be there, I'll be there, and multiple other tutors and students will be there. So that's a really good day, and you get to see the inn, you get to really experience what being on the ICCA Bar Course is about.
Perfect timing, Chris.
That is perfect timing. So I'd just like to say to all of you, thank you so much for attending today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to Jane and Patrick for assisting me today, and also a special thanks to Jody, who, as I say, you can meet again this Thursday, and I will see you all, I hope, very soon. Goodbye.
And sorry, we didn't manage to answer every single question, but come along to our next webinar and you can ask it again.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Lovely to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.